300-pound manager lead person stand behind me, watching me type and asking me to type faster.
That's nano-management. There is a fine line between nitpicking and, let's say, suggesting something valuable.
They don't think you know how to control your time. They're trying to do your time management for you.
Tactically micromanaging, but you just lost your respect with your team and nobody looks up to you. Nobody will come to you when they have problems.
Crazy. I'm agreeing with Tiago on this, on micromanaging. In my mind, I think really there's two places to do this.
Today, we're going to talk about management paradigms, and I would love for us to question them and try to see if they're really as reliable, as robust as people say they are. The first thing I want to talk about, and I'm going to start by reading the first paragraph of Archgoy wrote beginning of the year. Much has been said about servant leadership and the importance of trusting and giving full autonomy to individual and teams. I think in the last few years, my manager is a micromanager became a worldwide acceptable excuse to completely flip the blame on the leadership in organization if there was never a reason to micromanage. However, a much more damaging and common mistake many leaders are making and that nobody's talking about is that completely hands-off mode of leadership is actually dangerous. Leaders that are giving full autonomy and blindly trusting new people and new teams to make decisions, but as part of that, they don't provide the context and they don't actually push back. They are superficial. They are actually not looking for the long term. Then I think like a hands-off mode of leadership is really good in the short term, but is usually really bad in the long term. And I think like along with micromanagement, I think there are other things that people say you should not also do. I think like the other example is you should not share everything that you're hearing from your leadership or senior leaders down to your team, because that can create a lot of people running around, a lot of people getting stressed over, and you're better off digesting those things and filtering them down, not just being a pass-through manager. The other thing is like delegation, right? And not getting to the details. So another common acceptable, let's say, excuse is once ICs promoted into manager, they should not be looking at the code base anymore. They should not be reviewing PR. They should not be reviewing docs. They should be delegating, and trying to get out of the details, right? I think that's the other one. So I would love for us to talk about micromanagement, delegation, and getting to the details. I think those are all areas that most people accept as gold standards or great management.
Thank you for sharing, Tiago. So maybe we can take these one at a time and deconstruct and decompress these to see where these ones can fall short, right? So I think delegation is a great one. And assuming everybody has the typical 40-hour work week, usually when individual contributors get promoted to first-time managers, I have often seen that they struggle to make their work week fit within 40 hours. This is because they are usually doing their old job or there was no clear transition. So they still feel responsible for the code base, for being the only person that knows the domain well enough, where they want to continue working on that. But at the same time, now they have the responsibility of their whole team and making sure that they are motivated, they have the right kind of work, the right folks are getting promoted, the low performers are getting dealt with in whatever way appropriate. So delegation is often prescribed as the antidote to this, right? And saying, okay, you are not delegating well enough, which is why you're drowning in work. I think that's where the colloquial wisdom comes from, where every manager is told, delegate, delegate, delegate. But I think what you're saying, Tiago, is that if you delegate too much, then you lose visibility into your team, you lose visibility into your code base, you lose visibility into your project. And now you are truly a servant leader that's relying on your team to make all the tactical decisions, and you don't really have an input. You're essentially reduced to what a scrum master or a glorified project manager would be doing, because you are okay with seeing the big blocks and where they're going, but you have no sense of direction or ability to drive the project. Is that accurate, Tiago?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's the reasoning, like what are the consequences of delegating and getting out of the day-to-day way too much.
Okay, so let's jump into the micromanaging. I think that's probably the more interesting topic for our audience. I think everybody, as soon as they hear the words micromanage, everyone has the hair in the back of their neck standing up and saying, oh man, I hate that manager, or I know a guy that does that. And I know I'm stereotyping, but there have been times when I've had a tall 300-pound manager lead person stand behind me, watching me type and asking me to type faster so I can fix it faster and get stuff in production, right? That doesn't work. And I know folks might get a chuckle out of this, but I think that's the mental vision that everyone has of a micromanager, where somebody's standing with a big stick over your head, ready to whack you in the head as soon as you make a mistake, or if you're not typing fast enough, or if you're not fixing shit fast enough. So are you saying micromanagers are not real, or we require micromanagers?
So maybe I would say that that is not what I consider to be micromanagement. I think like that is, I don't know what's smaller than a micro, but I think like micromanagement is not like watch you while you're typing, but that's nano management. I think it's more like following you up, like checking your work.
They don't think you know how to control your time. They're trying to do your time management for you.
I mean, not only that, but could get quality assurance as well and see if like
Sure.
what you're producing, a lot more checkpoints than you would usually do. Selective micromanagement is like whenever you have a person struggling or like a particular team is struggling, right? It is a sign that you should get closer. I mean, it doesn't mean you're going to be watching that or doing checkpoints every hour, but you're going to be at least once a week getting status reports and actually questioning things and like double checking things and seeing things your own. Because if someone is not performing, be it like an individual or a group of people, there is something wrong either with some of the individuals or with the group dynamic or with what challenge they're facing. Maybe that's over there still. And is your duty, say, like as a manager, to understand and to have your own perspective, not rely on the people that are struggling to be sharing with you what they feel is the problem when they don't know how to get out of the problem. They're struggling there, right? It's not watching you typing or it's not saying go faster. Is more like changing directions, change members of the team. And on the opposite, and I think it's like, that's why it's called selective micromanagement, is because whenever things are actually going well and you're shipping things to production, like you see work happening, you see like good quality, you actually can get out of the details and eventually you can get there and kind of inspect on your own to see and to ask some questions to see how much folks know and how much is one or two people that are actually carrying over all the weight. But I think is more selective micromanaging is a way to, let's say, inspect and decide how much deeper do you need to go to be comfortable with what folks are doing under.
This is a good topic, Diego. I don't know if I completely agree with what you're saying. Maybe we can ask Louis and Vic as well if they have thoughts on this. So I'm trying to understand both strategically what selective micromanagement would look like. I think, Diego, you specified great instances where a manager or a leader would need to step in. But I think the part I'm struggling with is what can you do practically to help your team so that you're not in the team's face all the time, still able to help them where they need help, but still remembering to step back when the time is right. So maybe even for Vic, your perspective as an individual contributor wearing that hat, are there times where you have appreciated the frequent check-ins, or have there been times where you've been like, just fuck off, get out of my face, let me do my thing, I need space to figure this out, and I will come to you when I'm ready?
There have been times where I worked on a project that didn't have a project manager, and so I felt the manager checking in often was effectively doing the job of a project manager to make sure that I was on track, right? But I think that kind of micromanagement indicates a lack of trust, right? No, it doesn't matter that they were correct, that I didn't have my shit together, but ultimately it did mean that the person did not trust that I could get something done without them micromanaging it. So I think ultimately, no matter whether it worked out in the short term or not, I think long term it's still a problem because it does lead to an erosion of trust. It will lead to like a lack of communication. Assume that we're talking about a document that is being built, right? And assume that I start writing the document, I write it in public, and someone comes along and immediately starts making corrections to the document. You're going to stop sharing early because you're like, I just got started on it. I know I don't have that section yet. Like I just started on it. Like I intend to do that thing, and you're already in there making corrections. It basically will lead to a mid to long-term behavior where the IC starts to pull back and no longer shares early, no longer is doing work transparently, it leads to an erosion of trust within the entire team where everyone's just going to be like, okay, we have to like work in secret, until something is ready to be shown. That's what I think happens. So it may be something that you see as helpful in the short term, but it will absolutely lead to erosion.
I 100% agree, especially if you don't have any trust, any relationship with that person that came previously to starting micromanaging. I think like starting as a manager and starting to micromanage on the first week is not a good idea. And I would not recommend, right? And you need to do small doses almost, right? Is one thing whenever it's like a draft RFC or whatever you're doing and you kind of like, you get overprescribed, almost like to the level that Keir said, someone like on your shoulders correcting your typos, your grammar issues as you're typing. I think that is too extreme. And like, but I feel like there is like a big gap in between what you said, Vic, and what happens in reality. Because what is the other problem that I see is like you're letting things go way too much wrong, right? And then you get to production and you have a problem. You have on the calibration, you find out that folks are not performing well, or like you're getting like to the other extreme where it is happening and you're not seeing, right? Or you are showing as if everything is okay, right? Like is the illusion that, oh, you're doing a good job. When you don't correct, when you don't get into the details, I'm assuming that everything is good.
We're not talking about correcting behavior here, though. We're talking about literally like standing over someone's shoulder virtually. It may be Slack message and saying, hey, you said that you'd have this for me today. Is it there yet? Like, is it there yet? Is it there yet? So it's not quite correcting behavior so much as try to take control of their time, right? Like micromanagement to me is an attempt to solve a problem that doesn't exist yet. It's different if this is corrective behavior and you're trying to help someone. That is something that you should do as a manager.
Yes.
You should not wait until it's performance time to tell someone that they've done something bad. You absolutely should. I don't see that as micromanagement. I see that as proper management of, hey, I saw that you did this, or hey, I saw that you were rude to X, or hey, I noticed that you're letting a lot more defects through, or hey, I'm seeing that your code is not getting merged as often as everyone else because you don't ever blah, blah, blah. Those are fine. But we're talking specifically about trying to correct things that haven't happened yet because...
Yes, I don't think he's on the behavior side. And I think he's also on the output. He's also on different checkpoints. Sometimes there is no behavioral problem, right? Or sometimes is almost a direction or the quality problem. So
technical skills. Not necessarily. This person might just be a bad coder. And that is also something you need to deal with.
I think the thing that I'm questioning most is today in most companies is not acceptable for a manager to go to a PR or to go to a document and say, this is wrong. You should not go this way. Like, let's meet next week and discuss like a different direction.
Really? No one told my manager.
And that is micromanagement. And a lot of people are not doing that because they don't want to be called micromanagers. I think like hearing manager is like, oh, if I do that, my team is going to be thinking micromanage it. And even if they're right, even if they're valuable concerns.
You brought something up earlier about like the relationship between people and the amount of trust they have within the team, right? Like my team trusts my manager who was previously an IC, and we know that he is very good at what he does. And every now and then he looks through a PR and he'll say, hey, I'm about to look at a PR. And he does this disclaimer every time, even though he doesn't need to. Hey, I'm looking at a PR. I just have some suggestions or I have some questions just to stay fresh. Nothing I'm saying here. Like, you don't have to do this, but I'm curious, like, about the direction you're taking. The thing is, you can issue all the disclaimers you want, but you're a manager. The things you say have certain weight to them, whether or not you're telling me to ignore them. He does have great suggestions every single time. Okay, not every time. Let's say 90% of the time we're like, yeah, that is something that like we didn't consider, right? And I have given him feedback that that's something I'd like you to not do, because some of the things you say are the equivalent of this is a nit. You know how people say like nit, rename this file, but you don't have to. I'm like, then why did you, if you don't want me to do something, don't comment that in GitHub, because I am the person who will dismiss that comment. So anyway, we're gone off on a tangent, Louis.
I mean, I think Thiago is basically advocating for stepping in at certain points in time. And it could be when things are going sideways. It could be at the output level, and basically siphoning, stealing back autonomy and decision making. I don't think he's advocating for nitpicking. He's basically saying this thing looks like it's about to go off the rails. Just from what I see, I'm getting involved, like heavily involved now in all the decision making. And, a lot of the times, yeah, I mean, there's going to be huge resistance to something like that, because now you're talking about, all these people that have all these decisions, and they might be very smart people, and they might be in that situation because, I don't know, organizational politics, nonsense, handshake deals, you name it. There's a million reasons why things go haywire. And I think a manager who has the power and the ability to go and sort of take back on those deals and say, forget it, we're not doing it that way. It needs to be in the loop, or it needs to be sort of involved, needs to understand what's going on. And I think that's what he's advocating for. Correct me if I'm wrong, Thiago, and so I think with that mode in mind, what's usually going to happen, Vic, just like you said, is when somebody interjects in a situation like that and things end up much better than they would have been if they went down the default path, you're going to be super upset at first, but then eventually you're going to be very grateful, in fact, that things went down this path and that this guy, had the guts to step in and say, screw it, like, we're not doing that. And so crazy, I'm agreeing with Thiago on this, on micromanaging, because, I hate micromanaging, but these are the sorts of situations, and we live in a world now where I think if you don't do it in these situations very aggressively, you're probably going to, it's very easy that a lot of things could slip up. In my mind, I think really there's two places to do this. And it's if you're setting up like a brand new team, you're hiring all the people, you want to be very heavily involved because you want them to understand what the culture is, what the engineering decision-making looks like. You want to be a part of that while that's getting set up, right? Maybe you're not making all the decisions. You're heavily understanding all of that. You're also doing this, not necessarily when things are completely off the rails or, we had a failure and now we need to correct behavior, but you're doing it like you're preemptively, like you're seeing the train and it's going to crash. I mean, it's just, you could see it and it's going to crash down the track. And I think that's an important point where, if you know what you're doing, you could step in and you could save that train from crashing. You save all these people. And I think that's a very big thing.
I think you nail it, Louis. Exactly. I think he's like on mostly decision making and like more like how close you get. And I was actually going to comment on the thing about his manager, because I think that's a perfect example, right? Like, and I think there is a fine line between nitpicking and, let's say, suggesting something valuable, right? And I think it's like, yes, it's annoying like 9 out of 10 times, but because your manager is doing that, he's seeing what's happening, he's seeing what he's doing, what people are doing, and he's somehow still like connected to the details, right? And what I see happening is exactly what I described. Like a senior IC is going to give you feedback, don't do this, and then they're going to kind of, okay, I got bored of this. People are giving me feedback. I'm not going to go there anymore, right? Not going to go there anymore. And then they are on a leadership meeting and someone is suggesting something crazy, but they're so far away from the code base for what's happening that they need to bring guys feedback to explain. And they basically become like someone that's orchestrating people, like, oh, like talk to these people. And they are not able to give any answer, because there is a fine line between like what is micromanagement at the right level and what's nitpicking and what's that a lot of managers just fall back into not doing it. And I would argue that not doing it might be more dangerous than doing it and people getting annoyed. It is a super balance that you have to compensate on the other side. Maybe if you have really good one-on-ones, if your manager is like saying, Vic, you did an amazing job at this, like, and eventually he does that, you're not going to get as annoyed as a manager that you only see negative like things, right? Only corrections and...
Well, if it's followed by large periods of autonomy, Thiago, like for example, you have freedom for, 80% of the time, but once in a while, we're going to have to see what's happening. Why does this look like it's going off the rails to me? And I think people are a lot more forgiving if the bulk of the time you basically have this decision-making authority and this autonomy with your time and ownership and all these things. But every once in a while, when you go in hard at the micromanagement, they're annoyed at first. They're not going to quit on the basis of you sort of trying to right track something you clearly see as sort of going haywire. But I think you're buying your goodwill on this other side, right? Like you're buying your goodwill by allowing that sort of freedom in your team. I think if you're 100% of the time micromanaging, there's some truth to this, both extremes on this one, right? Like, no micromanagement and absolute micromanagement. I mean, you're just going to be hell, right? Both extremes, I think.
It does sound like you're both saying, if you ignore the fact that you personally might be annoyed by micromanagement and instead think of the greater good, like if a particular behavior leads to like better results for everybody, forgo the ego and let it happen. I don't know.
I'm still not entirely sold. I still feel conflicted internally. Let me ask this. So recent feedback I got from my manager is, okay, you need to be more strategic in your thinking and your guidance and less tactical, right? So in my head, I read that as stop being in the weeds as much, take a step up and provide guidance on what objectives there are, how they line up with the company. But I take that feedback as spend lesser time micromanaging, and I say that in air quotes, on bigger, better items. And Louis, I know in your article, you said your job as a leader is not to make people happy. Sorry, in Thiago's article, it said your job as a leader is not to make people happy. It is to make them productive and drive results that matter. I'm not saying, to Louis' point, that if you're micromanaging, everybody is going to quit tomorrow morning, but isn't part of your job as a leader to make sure that your team is happy? Isn't the colloquial knowledge that happy engineers are productive engineers, and they will go to not on a death march, but they will go as close as a death march for you, not because you're ordering them to, but because you were a good leader, you kept them happy, and this is the deadline, this is the project that needs to happen, this is what will make the company money, and they will march with you to that deadline, right? But if you erode that goodwill by micromanaging, isn't the fear that you are now, sure, gaining goodwill with senior leadership, and the company, everyone knows that, yeah, this leader is great because he's tactically micromanaging, but you just lost your respect with your team and nobody looks up to you, nobody will come to you when they have problems.
And I love that example. I think like there are two things there. I think like micromanaging at the wrong level is as dangerous as not doing, right? I think that's the first thing. And I don't know the feedback your manager gave you, and I think like Louis was spot on when he said he's more on decision-making, direction, alignment, and big things, right? I think, and is less on every individual PR or like really tiny things, right? It's more like, and he's like, you have to be super opportunistic in the moments that you get involved and how much you get involved. If you're managing like managers and you have a lot of other things going on, you're not going to be able to, okay, I'm going to stop my weekend, you're going to join every stand-up and you're going to be on every planning. You're going to have to like maybe allocate a few hours more, but be super selective about what moments, what kind of things are actually matter, right? I think the second thing, I think is like, yeah, it's true. Like your mission as a manager is drive results and to retain people. I think they say that like you have to balance both sides, right? If you only stress out people, you might deliver some results, but people are going to quit. And I think that there are moments that people are quitting like crazy and there are moments that they have to stay. But I feel that there is an illusion here that because you're making them happy and not getting involved and giving their autonomy, they're going to do a lot more for you. They're going to do a lot more for the company. I actually don't think that's true. I actually think that the more distant, like the more autonomy you give, I think there is a curve of diminishing return. I think there is a sweet spot of how much happiness can you give, how much like autonomy can you give to actually seeing people are like saying, oh, I love working for this company, I love working for this manager, and to a point where you lose control and they just want more. And I have seen the extremes happen. I have seen you start to give like say free coffee and people want like I don't know, snacks, and oh, you snack, now you need lunch, and like, and you see what happens, right? Like, I think that's the dangerous thing. And I think like, yeah, retention should be a big thing, but if you're actually trying to retain high performers, right, like they usually want to be driving results. And I think you're doing a favor in a lot of those moments, especially if you're being effective on like changing directions and getting to the details, because it's much easier for you, like at least in the short term, to just let things be and like get out of the discussion, right? I think it's like much easier. It's a lot less work for you, right? And you don't have the risk of having a conflict with someone or making someone angry at. So that's why is a double edge art kind of thing, right? Like you have to be careful, and he's more art than science. But
I also think this is less about upper management. Upper management doesn't care. I mean, if anything, probably upper management does not want you micromanaging. So I don't think this is really about pleasing upper management so much as it is about results and a certain level of consistency, I think, about getting those. And to the point, right? Like, I think there's a good point here about happiness. Yeah, people want to be happy. And we know that, autonomy gives happiness and all of that. But people also want to get promoted. People also want results, right? Like people want the thing to work so they can move their career forward. And if that means I've got to be unhappy for 2 or 3 months so that I could get promoted, screw it. Like that's what we're sacrificing. Forget the snacks, forget the lost autonomy on this project. But once we get the project and the thing makes the money, we get promoted, everybody's happy. I mean, I think happiness, just like Thiago said, I think there's diminishing returns in all aspects of this. Like, I think if you drive this, if this is the only horse you're beating, you're gonna drive people to leave. Yeah, I mean, they have no ownership, they have no autonomy whatsoever. Then I think you're gonna get in trouble. But I think this is less about pleasing upper management so much as it is about actually below you, making sure that that things are moving sort of in the right direction. I want to give one sort of example of a type of micromanagement that I'm actually pretty grateful that I sort of witnessed. We had this policy that went in at Jet. So we had individual teams that own their domain-driven design, all these things. And then we ran in our domain, right? The problem is when you do that, like you see at Uber or these other companies, people could just do crazy shit. I mean, like they're going to bring in their own tech stack. They're going to start using their own DBs. They're going to start, you name it. And so what happens at that point? It becomes a nightmare for DevOps. So now, at a leadership level, you have to have somebody that says, man, forget about it. You're not using that database. You're not using that other one. You're not using that. This is the one you're going to use. And that's taking away decision-making from these very smart people. I mean, we hired these people. They're top of the line from Google and Facebook. One wants to use Cassandra. The other one wants to use Bigtable. I mean, it's like, get out of here. We can't use both because you can't support both. And so we had this policy called no snowflakes. And what that meant is, look, these are for certain types of technologies. We've accepted these things. And if you bring in some other technology, there's a snowflake. Every one of them is different, right? That's the point. And so if you end up doing that, then this leads us down this path. But it was a tough conversation because you had these very senior, architect level type guys, principal engineers, distinguished engineers being told what to do. And sometimes you got to do that. And so you say at the application level, we're going to use Cosmos. If you need a relational, we're going to use Azure SQL. And you know what? You can't run your own shit. No, sorry. That's just not going to happen. And I think you need to do stuff like that. But when you do that, it's going to be very bad because people are going to be upset because now they just wrote some code against this thing, or maybe they were going along on this project. You just put the hammer down on that one. And that's just one example. I mean, it wasn't just that. It was like so many things like that. And I think that's where Thiago's at, basically. And I sort of agree with it.
I love that example. And I think like the other thing I was going to say is like, there is nothing more damaging to the morale of the people and the chain than not like ending the year, ending the quarter and not delivering anything. And I think I had a manager of mine that he used to tell this story all the time that was like 2010, we spent the whole year migrating something like to a new app. And we got at the end of the year, kind of like cold freeze came and we had nothing to ship. And it was like a shit show. It was like people like they didn't achieve anything. They spent the whole year working on this big migration. I'd like
all the snacks in the world can't save that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly it. And I think that's where like, yes, you're making people happy and not getting to the details and seeing like things about to go down and you're not doing anything. And then people start to leave because they get frustrated. They're not seeing results, right? I think that's more dangerous than making a few people unhappy for a couple of weeks, right? And I think that's what happens when there is bad leadership. And a lot of bad leadership, maybe one of the big root cause can be the wrong balance between micromanaging and not. And maybe micromanagement is not the right term. Is like as the Amazon principle is deep dive or getting to the details. I don't know exactly what they say, but yeah, you need to go deep in some cases.
Micromanagement's overloaded, right? Like I think that's probably sort of the problem is that it could mean literally watching every line of code, or it could mean a decision as big as what database you could use for this use case.
This one that Louis talked about is actually an example of good micromanagement, except I wouldn't call it micromanagement. I would call that standard setting at the organizational level, whether you're declaring what the technical direction of the organization is going to be. Like in 3 years, we'll simplify down to 2 stacks. In year 1, you're going to have a bunch of people throw a fit about it. And after that, as an organization, you're going to move faster. And I wouldn't consider that micromanagement. And maybe that says something about me. That's the kind of micromanagement you could totally do to me, and I would just let you.
I think I get the first level managers micromanaging and what that would look like. I know we have some folks here that are directors or were VPs or higher. I'm just trying to visualize on what that would look like for somebody that is manager of managers or has larger organizations reporting to them. Would this look any different for, let's say, directors or VPs or SVPs, where they have larger orgs? If we are prescribing tactical micromanagement for them and saying, yes, you should jump down into the weeds, in this case, what would be an example of doing this right, or them being able to get either a team back on track or a project back on track? Is there an example, or it could be fact or fictional that anyone of you can share based on experience?
Maybe not like the best example, but one example that I have seen. I hate in the moment when that happens, but looking back, I think it was actually good. It's like, okay, whenever you have like the monthly OKR review or quarterly OKR review, you see like a OKR going down, like red, and people are giving bullshit like explanations about that and kind of like month after month. And I feel that's mostly a leadership problem. I think there is like 2 modes. Okay, SVP level, and you might not be reporting all the OKRs all the way up to the SVP. So the SVP only see a fraction of the OKRs, right? What would be the right behavior? Is like, okay, you see a OKR once and you ask details and you don't get like a good like explanation about the diagnostic of the problem and the next steps. You might accept it once. Okay, 1 month, free pass, right? Next month, then you see that happening again, and people are kind of like waving hands and running circles, right? And they cannot come up with a good excuse. I think it's time to weekly checkpoints, or like, I want to see, let's meet up next week, schedule with my EA. I want to get into the details. Tell me exactly. I want to know the answer to A, B, and C. And we're going to be doing this weekly checkpoint, depending on how important those OKRs are, right? Like, I understand it and I feel confident I can get out, and we're going to work every week instead of every month, right? Instead of reporting at the OKR meeting to 150 people, we're going to be reporting like to maybe only 5 people and myself, and I'm going to get into the details. I'm going to ask as much questions as I want. And it's going to be painful for the folks that have like this red OKR, because they're going to have to put a lot of like presentations together. They're going to have to shift strategies, but I think it's going to drive results. Like a lot of times might be that other things are going to become red for that one to become great. But if that's the priority, I think that would be a good example of like a behavior that I have seen some leaders doing and others not doing. The other behavior would be let that go and ask a few questions, send at the end to your director later asking follow-ups, and let's solve this async, right? Like, and that never happens, right? I think it's pretty hard to get engagement out of something that they're not getting super involved. And I think that's what like a good CEO does too, right? I think like they get like, if there is something critical, there's some critical OKR that's not going the direction they want, they are going to be to the people and ask what's happening, and like they want to know more. Surface level answers are not going to satisfy them. I think that's what is that. But I don't know if folks agree or disagree.
One thing I was sort of witnessed at Walmart, which I thought was very successful, we had this big sort of rewrite to do in pharmacy. And one of the things that the VP of the group did, he said, look, we're going to take, 1 or 2 people from each team. We're just going to try to deliver like a slither, a very, very tiny part of this big project, just to make sure that we could actually do it in this style and this agreed upon with the tech stack we picked, with all these things. And, he actually took the time for a whole month every week to dive in and do the code reviews with those smaller team to get this thing to sort of the finish line. And once, those people that were involved in that thing, presenting in front of this VP all the time, sort of level set the expectation of what the rest of the project was sort of going to look like. And that's sort of one example. Another example I've seen, which is a different type of tactical micromanagement, is, Walmart acquired this sort of pharmacy app, whatever. And the new VP came in, VP of tech, very high up. There were some projects that were sort of going haywire. Said, look, I want to do code reviews with every one of the teams. And, on this particular project that we're working on. And literally all of the teams, engineers, their managers showed up to a 1-hour meeting with this guy and opened up the books, and he looked at the code, and everybody was sort of working. And it's not like the guy found anything or looked at it and said, oh my God, what the hell is this? I mean, everyone was professional sort of trying to do the right thing. And it's interesting because it did make some observations and some suggestions, like, seeing this team work this way and do this, and this is similar to what these guys are doing, but you're using totally different libraries. You're doing this in a totally different style. Is there a reason why, you guys haven't ironed that out? It's an interesting thing. And those are sort of two examples. One is like at the front of a project. The other one is sort of when something's going wrong. And these are very high level people. I mean, I'm not talking about like, line level manager. They were above the senior directors, right? And so it's very interesting, and I do think you got to do stuff like that from time to time.
Thank you, Louis. So I think going back to the original list that we started with on common advice new managers get, right? We said delegate, delegate, delegate. Do not micromanage. Get out of the weeds. And then another one that's often shared with managers is called being a good shit umbrella. And for folks that are hearing this for the first time, it essentially means the manager acts as a shield for all the crap, and by crap I mean drama, politics, noise in terms of information that they don't need yet or is not directly applicable to your team. You save that, you absorb all of that, but keep the team shielded from that because they don't need to know that information yet. And the premise for that thought is that the lesser they know about everything that they don't need to know, the more focused work they can do. They continue to do deep work. They have more time and concentration for their current task at hand. But I think there is more to be said around what can be shared with the teams and how far that should be shared, right? So if we are saying you should tactically micromanage, then we are saying, okay, we will let you feel the pain. We want you to see what is going on so that it doesn't come as a surprise 2 months from now when you get called out in front of everyone. You knew all along that something was brewing and your manager didn't keep that from you, so you had time to react or respond in an appropriate manner. Vic, do you want to share your thoughts?
So I have a variant of this that I call the transparent shit umbrella. So first of all, we should say you don't want to be a shit funnel for your team, okay? The shit funnel is bad because now your team is getting overwhelmed with things that they, first of all, don't need to know, and two, may not actually happen. Oftentimes leaders are talking about moving teams around or adding things to their teams. You don't want your senior engineers, staff engineers getting overwhelmed with stuff that will never happen because a lot of this stuff really is hypothetical and you don't want that. So I do think that, you have to have some level of transparency here in the umbrella-ness where varying people on your team may need to know different amounts of information. Like maybe your principal engineers need to know that changes are coming, and everyone else on the team, like when you do your team meetings, you as a manager can say, here X, Y, and Z happening. You figure out how to distill this information in a way that A, your team doesn't feel like you're withholding information, but two, they're also not completely overwhelmed by the amount of stuff you're throwing at them that may never come to pass. For example, if I read Blind as an example, there's all this gossip that I don't care about, right? It really is a gossip. It's a rumor mill about things that may never happen. It's like someone is panicking about someone else having a private meeting on their calendar. It's stuff like that. So it's important, I think, to maintain the right level of transparency, but also know what is relevant to your team. And I find that the managers who know exactly where that line is are far more successful than the ones that just say, here's everything, or I'm going to tell you nothing until it's public. And then suddenly you have completely blindsided your team and they've had no chance to prepare, like you said, Kater.
I think you summarized very well, Jake. Like I was actually going to say that I think it's the same way that the selective micromanagement thing, when you were withholding, much, and you were letting many things go. And also there is a seniority thing, as you said. If you think like if you are, let's say, talking to staff engineers is one thing. And I think there is an element of gossip, as you said, right? Like how much of that is hypothetical? How much of that is things that are actually might be helpful? that folks are informed, right? And like informed versus worried versus like prepared. I mean, that's pretty hard. For example, I would say like, or if you have a meeting with the senior management, C-level, once a month, you have some insights on how some of the C-level reply to something, and you are dealing with, it might work to say, oh, I heard that leader saying that you might be going on that direction. I actually don't feel super confident about this based on what I'm seeing, and here's why, and I might be wrong about this. Like, but I think like also like it doesn't mean that you should be like just like gossiping everything that you're hearing. And I think as many things is basically a balance, right? And I think is a balance of like seniority and moments, right? Like if it is not relevant to that chief, if it is something so far away, don't even bother them, right? If it is something that might impact their project, yes, it might be worthwhile to let them worry a little bit about that, because that might be fun.
I think that covers that really well. I think I just wanted to touch back on the delegation bit for a second. I know we touched on that at the beginning, but we didn't really get a chance to cover it fully. So with delegation, I think commonly managers are asked to delegate well because the first time they delegate, somebody else does it either differently than how they are used to or how they would do it, or they would take longer than they would do it. So very often the common pitfall is that first-time managers will stop delegating because they're like, I can do this better, or I can do this faster, or this is probably done best by myself, so let me not delegate. And this is how they start drowning because they don't trust their team or they haven't empowered their team to do this, right? I think even when I first co-founded my own startup, I was an individual contributor. I was a software engineer at BlackBerry then. That's something I'd started as a side hustle. And we had a team of people that we hired in Bangladesh. And this was my first crack at trying to give other people tasks to do or software user stories to do. And when I saw how long it was taking, that pinched me. I don't know if it was my ego. I don't know if it was my experience up to that point, but I'm like, this is completely bootstrapped, so I am paying out of my pocket, so this is hurting even more, which is why I don't want to delegate, right? I can do this 5 times faster, but that's when my co-founder said, once you delegate, don't expect it to be done either the way you would do it or how quickly you would do it. And that's the whole point of delegation. Somebody will do it the way they want to, at the speed they want to, but it will get done. So you have to trust. So that was my first crack at it. But I know Louis had different thoughts on when delegation goes well and when delegation can go wrong. So
I think you touched on it quite a bit there, Kira. But basically, it's like, why do they give that advice to technical people all the time? Why do people harp on it all the time? Why do they say delegate? And they say that because, most technical people are pretty bad at that in the beginning, right? Like all of this ties together because it's this idea of the shit umbrella. Oh, I'll just do all the shitty tasks because I could do them faster and I won't. That's not, that's probably not good long term for you as a manager, okay? But many people will say, oh, I'll just protect the team and, I'll do this over the weekend and people fall into this trap. But then, we got into this zero interest rate era of software development and lots of hiring. And, people started taking this very lax attitude towards it. And, delegation is not that bad. Let's just hire more people and throw these things to that guy and this thing to this person and her and him and whatever. And then here we are, like now you've delegated like crazy. You have whatever. You have no insight into what the hell is happening because you are, completely out of the weeds. You've never done this tactical micromanagement, selective micromanagement, whatever you want to call it. You've never done some of these other things. And so it's almost like this whole delegation idea is kind of like what happens to engineers, to use a sort of a metaphor. I don't know if it's a good metaphor, but it's sort of what happens to engineers with the complexity, right? In the beginning, they love complexity and they climb up this tree of complexity. And then they, everything gets crazy complicated with factory classes and all kinds of stuff. And then at some point, they put enough time in when they have to support those systems and extend those systems. And they realize, man, this is actually crazy. Like we've gone too far. And then they come back and simplicity is in vogue when you're like a principal. And I think delegation works in a similar way, in a sense that in the beginning, people tend to, okay, I'm a new manager. They're either on one side where they're not delegating at all or they're delegating like crazy because everyone's saying, just delegate, man. That's the thing to do. And you end up in this place where you've climbed up to this extreme. And then you come back around at some point and you realize that some things maybe you got to be very selective. Some things I should not delegate. Like this is, this is a key thing. This train's going to crash. I'm going to do that one myself.
I was actually going to say on delegation, and I mean, similar than like micromanagement, but I would say it's on the other aspect. I think like micromanagement, people like don't do as much as you need. I think delegation, the problem that I see is that it's not that they don't do often, it's that they do at the wrong level or they don't prepare enough to delegate. So it's like delegating, I think combines with the idea of glue work, right? I see a lot of managers delegating glue work, right? Oh, schedule meeting, do slides, and not delegating the things that are actually going to make people grow. I think and a lot of times, I think delegation requires a lot of preparation, like to be thinking about what you're going to delegate to someone, sometimes weeks in advance, right? It's really hard to like delegate whenever you are on a deadline. I think that's the other problem that I see is like people don't know how to delegate. People are not used to that. They usually use delegation as basically as code monkeys, and I think like today with ChatGPT and all that, I think like a lot of the tasks that some managers use to delegate can be probably automated on LLM based. And the things that they should be sharing or should giving the opportunity for folks to do, I don't see they delegating that as much. They still want to present the meetings. They still want to be the ones with the final word on things. And I think that's where there is value on delegation to kind of actually scale yourself, right? Also, delegation doesn't mean completely hands off and just accepting anything, right? You need to be inspecting that. You need to be correcting. And a lot of times they delegate and forget. Right. And I think people basically go on the wrong track. They feel that they're doing fantastic. And then whenever someone is actually going to look at what they're doing, they're surprised on how bad it is. Something like delegation is more like preparation than just like giving tasks away. And it was more about giving projects away.
I was recently listening to a podcast by Tim Ferriss. So he had this guy called Sam Korkos, who is the co-founder of Levels Health. So Levels is basically a continuous glucose monitor that you put on your arm, and they have a cool app that gives you. So it's not just for pre-diabetics or diabetics. Anybody can put that and watch what having a large bubble tea or a sugar-filled Starbucks drink would do to your blood level sugar, right? So that's their whole premise. So Sam's whole premise for everyone in his company is that they must have an executive assistant, an EA, that they delegate to. And he goes into great detail around what company they use, how much they pay. They essentially pay around $2,500 for an EA based out of the Philippines that'll work some of your hours, but not all your hours. And they force everyone in their company to, as they're going through their workday, they have Loom turned on. Loom is a software that just lets you record your screen, record your camera, both like mic, so audio and video, as you're going through your day. So they basically share these Looms, record these Looms, share them with the EA, and then the EA learns on your thought process on how you deal with your emails or how you deal with certain administrative tasks. And over time, they get better at doing whatever you would. So they use this across their product organization. They use this across their engineering organization. And he goes as far as saying that if somebody doesn't want their EA, I have a one-on-one discussion with them to understand why. And it's often a case of them not knowing how to delegate or them not being clear enough in their Loom instructions so that it can be distilled and given away to an EA. He shared some statistics in the podcast, which we can link in the show notes. But essentially, he was saying that it freed up his product managers to think more strategically and increase their roadmap, both quality-wise returns by 60% year over year, because that's the amount of mental bandwidth it gave to each of these employees. I think Sam is probably on the other extreme where he's enforcing everybody gets an EA or has to at least try having an EA for a certain length of time. And maybe I think that's a good episode to get into for next time or a future episode around things we can automate and how to delegate effectively, whether this be with ChatGPT or getting somebody offshore to help you out with your task. But definitely there is a balance to be found there on what works well for each individual. Okay, I think we went all over the place around what modern management should look like, what the colloquial wisdom is around what you should and should not do. And like Thiago said, I think it's more of an art, not a science. Some of it comes with experience. Some of it comes with listening to recordings like this one, where you learn from our experiences, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. And hopefully you learned something today that you didn't know before. Thank you. See you next time.